Hi, this is Sean D'Souza, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation Podcast. This podcast isn't some magic trick about how to work less. Instead, it's about how to really enjoy the work that you do and to enjoy your vacation time. Hi, it's Sean, and you're listening to the 3-Month Vacation. How do you introduce the concept of roundabouts to motorists? The concept of the roundabout was a French idea, but it was the British who made the most use of it. But the roundabout was still a bit klutzy until 1969. But it wasn't that year that engineer Frank Blackmore invented the modern roundabout. He helped to introduce the new idea to motorists, but not through an ad campaign. He would literally park himself on a traffic island and he would shout out instructions through a megaphone-like device. It was because of Blackmore's simple plan that the roundabout began to take root and began to work. His idea was that entering vehicles had to give way to traffic that was already moving on the roundabout. And if you've ever been on a roundabout, you know that it's such a delightful invention. Unless, of course, it's a huge roundabout and there's loads of traffic. That's when it becomes a complete nightmare. In our business, we have this similarity. When we have one product to sell, that's okay. But the moment you have 4, 5, 6 products to sell, it becomes a logistical nightmare. And yet, you can pre-sell your products, you can pre-sell your services, and there is a bit of complexity involved. Let's work out what's involved in how you can systematically manage pre-sale. And that's what we're covering today. 3 questions on pre-sale. We've been going through a bunch of podcasts that have been shorter, 10 minutes, 8 minutes, and now you've got a really long one. We might even do 2 parts of this. This is about pre-sale. The first thing that we'll cover is which products are more important and which are not. The second is, have we created a separate section for each of the vital products or services? And the third, it'll be about how we can create urgency and scarcity. Let's start with the first one, which is which products are the most important and which are not. The term important is probably too vague when you're considering your products or services. And that's because the importance of the product or service is dependent solely on your strategy. Let's say you have a product that's priced at around $20. Is it more important than a product that's priced at $2,000? Well, the answer depends on your strategy. Let's say you're writing a book and you want to get it in the hands of as many clients as possible. That book is just $20, but that $20 will probably outweigh the $2,000 product. In which case, you would want to start with the book pre-sale right now, and then work out a sequence that would head directly to the launch. Later in the year, you might have a $2,000 product that, if you sold to just 40 people, would generate $80,000. So when we start to measure which product is more important, we don't go solely on the price. We go on the basis of the strategy. Getting that $20 book to 100 people or 500 people, that is probably more important in the long run because eventually those people will come into your system. They'll buy a second book, maybe a third book, some services, some products, some consulting, and eventually maybe they'll buy your big $2,000 product. So what we have to consider is what is important to our strategy rather than do we just pre-sell the most important thing. In the case of Psychotactics, you'll notice that not all the products or services are in a pre-sale sequence. So if you take the examples of products like outlining or chaos planning, these products are in the range of $30 to $50, and it may seem that their lower price point is what relegates them to this situation where we're not pre-selling it. But that's not true, because you can look at other products like the copywriting course, and that's an expensive course, and yet that's not in the pre-sale sequence either, because we've only wanted a few products to be on that pre-sale sequence. And that's because this is 2019, and this is the strategy that we're rolling out right now. When you look at the range of products that are on Psychotactics, you have products like Black Belt Presentation. That's not on pre-sale. And Dartboard Pricing, which is about pricing. It's not about pre-sale. But at some point, we might change that strategy, and those products might be pre-sold. But right now, when you go to Psychotactics, you'll see anywhere between 15 to 20 products and courses and workshops, and not everything is on pre-sale. What we need to learn at this point is that we might have different types of products and differently priced products, but it depends on your strategy. What are you really trying to do? What's that big picture? Because when trying to get a pre-sale sequence together, a lot of clients tend to go, okay, I have 3 products. Let me put all of them in a pre-sale sequence. Let me roll out that sequence. And then you have 5 products. And then you're trying to put all of them in the pre-sale sequence. And then you have 7 and you can tell this is a nightmare. You can't have all of them on a pre-sale sequence. You can only have maybe 4 or 5 or 6 in a year, depending on how often you mail out, what you're doing. But essentially, why are you doing what you're doing? How does it end up with either clients buying a $20 product, which just goes to a $30, to a $50, and to maybe a $2,000 product? If that's what your goal is, to get people through the system, then they need to start at the $20 product. So the $20 product becomes more expensive. If, on the other hand, you think, well, my clients are ready to buy a $2,000 product, I only need to sell 10 of them, in that case, the $2,000 product becomes crucial. But at no time are we seeing everything enter the roundabout at the same time. You're getting one car in the roundabout, and then the second one, and then the third one. And most of the cars, they're just sitting on the side, on the periphery, waiting for their turn, waiting for that strategy to work itself through the system. And that brings us to the end of the first part, which is determining which products are the most important for your strategy and how you introduce them instead of every single product. This takes us to the second part, which is about creating a separate section, because we do need to create a separate section for each of the vital products or services that you intend to pre-sell. Let's find out how that's done. Let's say we have a strategy. There is no perfect strategy. There's never been a perfect strategy, but we have approximately an idea of what we're going to pre-sell. And having determined what we're going to promote and pre-sell, we then have to create these little units or silos. Take, for instance, the situation right now at Psychotactics. Let's say it's July right now, and that we're keen to launch a book called Suddenly Talented, and that launch is in April next year. If we go through a pre-sale sequence and we make announcements, lots of little announcements, if we create snippets, if we give out samples, that's already the genesis of a good strategy in place. However, it's far better to create a separate area, a silo, a separate section. And if you go to psychotactics.com/suddenly, you'll see that separate section. It's very rough right now. It doesn't tell you what you're getting or how. It's just there. And it might start with just something extremely basic, like what you see at this link. But what is the purpose of this separation? What it's doing is getting clients to opt in to a specific channel. And if you treat this solely like a channel, then you have to do programming. And so my task would be to find a good barista, to order a coffee, maybe more than one coffee, and then work out what goodies, what announcements, what snippets do we have running all the way up to the April launch. And because clients are tuned to this specific channel, they're going to be more receptive when that launch happens way down the line. So this is almost 8 months down the line. As you would expect, they'd be more eager to receive goodies, they're more eager to communicate with you, and that's because we have created this separate section. A launch, any launch, is somewhat like a wedding. You've got to create the excitement to the run-up. You've got to have clear information. You have to have announcements. And unlike a wedding, you also have to give away goodies in advance. You have to give away snippets in advance. What we need to do is create enough excitement, enough enticement, so that the final launch isn't this last minute, buy my book, buy my course, buy my product scenario. We also have silos for the article writing course, for the info products course, and for all of the courses. You've probably seen this. We call this the waiting list area. And these silos are very crucial because you treat it almost like a channel, like a sports channel or a documentary channel, and people are tuned in to whatever is coming on that channel. And while they're aware of the other channels, they're less attentive to the other channels. But as clients, we're not always rational. Just because someone has signed up for the book on talent doesn't mean that she won't sign up for the article writing course. And if this client is super eager, she might sign up to quite a few others. Now, obviously, she's done the signing up, but there's a good chance that the client could wake up one morning and find 5 different sets of goodies, all from Psychotactics. And yet, that situation never occurs. It's because the goodies go out with a higher frequency in the run-up to the event. So if we were to go back to the talent book and the launch of the talent book in April, what would happen is that from June or July to December, you'd get a few emails or podcast announcements. Nothing over the top, just a few to keep you abreast of what's happening. A set of goodies might be slipped under your door too, but just enough to keep things moving along. And the only time you're going to see a step up in the activity is between 8 to 16 weeks before the actual launch date. At which point, all the other pre-sale volume comes down. It gets turned down to low. And the focus is on one product or one service. In this case, it would be Suddenly Talented. So all the focus would be on that. Everything else goes to low. But there is a way to keep that volume at reasonably high right through the year without the client getting irritated. And that is by using editorial. In this podcast itself, you were told about the Suddenly Talented book. You were given an approximate release date. You even have a nudge with the link earlier, which allows you to opt in. And these are 3 sets of pushes, all in one article. But because it's part of the article, because it's part of the explanation, because it's the editorial, you don't feel the same resistance as if you got a sales email. Now you think of all the articles, all the presentation, every webinar, seminar, audio, video, every single piece of editorial that is being put out from now until the launch. If you include your product or service as an example, as a case study, you are already pre-selling. And there's an advantage for me as the seller. Because it's editorial, I don't have to scamper through the information, and neither do you. On a sales page, I have to stay within boundaries. I have to get to the point very quickly. I have to put in the bullets. I have to do all of that stuff. When it's editorial, I don't have to be in such a big hurry. For instance, I do a presentation called the Yes and Yes presentation, and it's about pricing. And in that presentation, I spent over 15 minutes talking about the article writing course and just the payment grid, just the Yes and Yes, which is at the bottom, the regular and the premium. I don't have to hurry. I can go over every single bonus, why it's a bonus, why it's crucial. Essentially, it is editorial. It's showing them how to create a Yes and Yes pricing grid so that they get higher prices. So the client is not offended. They're not mad at me for taking up their time. They would be if it were just a pitch. But if you watch that video, and it's on YouTube, just type in Yes and Yes, what you'll see is that it's helping the client structure their pricing grid. And so it's getting them another 10 to 15% in income per year if they put the advice in place. And they know that you're pre-selling them some other product, but as long as you're helping, they're happy to listen, they're happy to watch, they're happy to read. And at this point, we start winding down the second part of the pre-sale topic. And that is, we needed to create this silo, this section, this one channel that people are tuned into. And if you play it right and you increase the volume of your pre-sale closer to the date of the launch, your client is going to wake up and find 5 different goodies from 5 different products that you're selling because you turn the volume up and turn the other volume down. However, if you want to get an almost recurring, permanent sort of pre-sale going, you'll need to use editorial. Put your case studies in your audio, your video, your text, whatever. Put it there, make it interesting, and your client is going to listen to you. And you've gotten the message across one more time. And this is to a much larger audience who's not necessarily signed up to that silo, that section that you've already created. So that's the end of the second part, but there is the third part. You know of this. It's called scarcity. It's called urgency, but we don't do it. Let's find out more about scarcity and urgency. Several years ago, a client asked me why we don't have the article writing course more frequently. And I went into a bit of a ramble. I said, oh yeah, that's a good question because the course is like jumping from a frying pan into the fire. And then I went on to how intense the course is for both the clients, for me. And yet that wasn't the complete answer to the question. The more significant reason for not having the course every year was scarcity. If the course were held more often, you wouldn't feel that scarcity. And even as I was explaining that concept to the client, I had a story at the back of my mind, and this was the story of the late Gary Halbert. Now, Halbert was considered to be one of the most in-demand copywriters on the planet at that point in time. And he decided to cash in on his fame. He decided to host a series of workshops. Almost instantly, the first workshop was filled, so he announced a second. That was filled, he announced a third. And then he went on that way, one after the other. But do you see where this story is going? Of course you do. When you and I go shopping to the supermarket, we don't like scarcity. We want to go and buy beans and chocolate and ice cream and bread. And there's no tension because it's always there. When you get there, they always have some stock. They have some other stock. You can get it. But the moment we realize that an item is scarce, we want it more than ever before. The scarcity mentality applies not just to the essentials like chocolate, but also to something pretty random like a special fountain pen, or even a seat at the restaurant that looks out on the harbor. Halbert's fourth workshop, as the story goes, was a bit of a dud, which is precisely the reason why we make products and services scarce on Psychotactics. And the biggest reason for scarcity is that it creates urgency. When you're starting out, this might not seem feasible, but it's feasible almost at any level. Always think of it as a game of musical chairs. If there are 10 chairs, then there's less scarcity, more people run around. But if there are just 3 chairs and 6 people, well, now there is a level of scarcity. And we at Psychotactics have tens of thousands of people on the list, and there are just 25 books or 25 courses. And therefore you see how quickly everything sells out. But even at a lower level, you can create the scarcity, you can create that urgency. I'll give you one example of what we did and how it boosted revenues in the self-study section by about 500%. So in 2016, we were generating about $30,000 for a bunch of home study products. And then we created scarcity and urgency. So you take the course like Uniqueness or some other products, and because they were not on the radar, because they're not part of any pre-sale sequence, they were not getting any attention from clients because they didn't notice them. And so we put them on a scarcity factor, which is we took them off the main grid and we said only 25 copies are going to be sold. We did this for 3 or 4 products, and the sales went up from 30,000 in 2016 to 130,000 in 2018. Nothing changed in terms of the sales page or the products or anything else. The only factor that changed was scarcity, thus creating urgency and creating a greater amount of revenue. You have to have some products that the client can buy and some products that they can't buy. And in doing so, you've created scarcity and urgency. And with that, we finished the third part and we come to the end of this podcast. Let's find out what we've covered so far. We started out with how do you determine which products you are going to put on the pre-sale sequence. And this depends more on your strategy rather than the price of the product. A $20 product could possibly be more valuable to you than selling a $2,000 product. At other times, the revenue might be crucial and the $2,000 product might be a better option. You have got to decide what is my strategy and don't just look at the price. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that you've got to create sections, you've got to create silos, you've got to create this one channel that people are tuned into. And that way, they're going to get all sorts of goodies, snippets, announcements in this run-up to whatever is being launched at the end of the year, next year, 16 weeks from now, whatever. But you don't always have to do this through sales pitches, through goodies, and through snippets, etc. You can do this through editorial, just like we did in this podcast, just like you'll see on webinars that we do. We'll bring up that term, article writing course, the book, Suddenly Talented, just like I'm doing right now, and it's part of the editorial, so it's okay. You can do this repeatedly as often as you send out any editorial material. But all of this is not going to go very far unless you have this game of musical chairs, unless you have urgency and scarcity. And it has to start with scarcity because scarcity creates the urgency. Just by saying we have this clock and it's ticking, that's not urgency. Urgency is really magnified when you have scarcity. So think of scarcity first. You've heard me on this podcast saying there are only 25 seats for this course, or there are only 25 seats for that product. And the scarcity is being created on a constant basis, which then creates urgency. And I'm repeating myself now. So we'll find out what's happening in Psychotactics land, and then we'll get out of here. We have 3 self-studies coming up in August, September, and October. The first one is the Info Products course. That's on the 2nd of August. The Uniqueness is on the 20th of September. And the Article Writing course is on the 11th of October. I'm creating scarcity. There are only 25 copies. We don't sell more than those. And you'll find out if you're the 26th person because the page will be closed and we're gone from there. Now, to give you an example of how we create the silo, how we create the section, Well, if you want the info products, go to psychotactics.com/infogoodies. If you want uniqueness, you go to psychotactics.com/ugoodies, and the article writing is /awgoodies. So that's very simple to remember: info goodies, u goodies, and AW goodies. And that's your pre-sale class in a bit of a nutshell. And we're going to continue with this pre-sale series because a bunch of questions came up based on all of this information. And those questions came up in 5000 BC, which is why 5000 BC is so helpful, because you might have the information, but then you don't have the answer to question A or question R or question M, and you need to ask those questions. Well, what are you going to do? And 5000 BC becomes this kind of consultation, because you can ask the question, then follow up with another question or 200 questions after that. If you look at it as a membership site, then yes, it's another membership site. But if you look at it as consulting, then you're looking at it at a completely different level. So join us in 5000 BC, ask your questions, get your specific answers. And yes, it's a great place. You get to meet some people just like you, introverts, and we'll see you in 5000 BC. And that brings us to the end of this podcast. I'll say bye for now. Bye-bye. Still listening? You know how I've been talking about Suddenly Talented, the book. And last week I had to be suddenly motivated because I wasn't writing anything. And I've been promising this for a long time, but wasn't writing anything. And Renuka came up to me and goes, "You have to start writing now, otherwise it's going to be 2020. So I started writing the book. And as you do when you write a book, you start, day 1, great, day 2, great, day 3, great, day 4, great. And then there's confusion on day 5, and then day 6 is day 1. So that's where I am right now. The book is progressing. So that's one level where you have to go through that process of writing something, creating something. And then on the other hand, as I'm talking to you, as I'm recording this podcast, I realize, oh wait, it's not just the book that has to be created, but also the pre-sale. Now, luckily, we've already slipped in the editorial part of that pre-sale in this podcast and on Facebook, but purely as editorial, not as a sales pitch. And it has got that response already in advance. So that's already working, but I still have to sit down, still have to go to the cafe, still have to order those coffees. There's a lot of work to be done. No one is saying this is easy, but it gives you that level of freedom in your own business and allows you to do the things that you really want. So that's where we are with Suddenly Talented, and you'll find out more as we go along. Again, if you missed that one, it's at psychotactics.com/suddenly. And you want to go there quickly. Why? Because right now it's such a basic page that you get to see how basic you can be, how simple you can be when you're starting to promote something, and then you can fix it later. I'll say bye for now and see you in 5000 BC. Bye-bye.